So this is a clip from the Pasco County Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, board meeting October 2022 of an exchange that occurred between Commissioner Catherine Starkey and FDOT District 7 Secretary David Gwynn. They're talking about the parallel flow intersection.
Timing and the analysis of a pedestrian crossing 54 and 41 with the new designs, it was like 20 minutes to get from one corner to the other with like 9 lights.
Okay, so what she just said is a lie. This is straight up fraud. She's also admitting to committing a crime, because in the state of Florida, it's illegal for an MPO board member to have a private meeting with consultants to discuss a project. That's a violation of Florida Sunshine Law. Okay, but aside from that, the information that she received is false. She's saying that it takes 20 minutes to cross the road at the PFI. And that's false. And I wasn't at this meeting, so I just learned of this exchange when I watched the video, the archived video. And I complained, and my complaints went nowhere.
Or something.
That was one of the alternatives.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that's going to be the one.
That was crazy.
So he's saying here that's one of the alternatives, the PFI. There's 3 alternatives. Single point urban interchange was the one they want, the one they wanted all along. The PFI, and then the CFI, continuous flow intersection. Well, they're not talking about the CFI because that's never really been a contender. It's always been between the SPUI and the PFI. And he's laughing at the PFI here. She's calling it crazy. 20 minutes, ha ha ha, to cross the road. That's all false. That's a lie. This is a clip from the February 2023 MPO board meeting where FDOT gives their presentation where they announce they're selecting the single point urban interchange as their preferred build alternative. This is after a 7-year saga. And it's just a pack of lies. So it's at this point in their presentation to the board that I am removed from the room after stopping their presentation to call out FDOT fraud. They're committing fraud. I'm saying, I stand up, say you're committing fraud, and the chairman of the board starts slamming the gavel. They have a conniption, and they have a sheriff there to remove me from the room because they knew I was going to be upset about this whole thing.
Eastbound and then do a U-turn at the Lowe's driveway.
That's me.
Okay, that's a first. That's horrible. Shame on you.
I was wondering, why do we have 2 bailiffs today? Now I don't mind.
So they had an extra sheriff there just for me because Gwen knew that I was upset over the whole thing and knew that I was going to probably make a fuss. And before the FDOT presentation, at the very beginning of this board meeting, I gave a 3-minute presentation, and that's following a 10-minute presentation I gave to the board in January with basically all my complaints. All of it fell on deaf ears. Here they're just laughing at me. This guy is Commissioner Mariano, and he's laughing at me after I'm being removed after my being removed from the room. You know, these people on this board, they're all corrupt. Every one of them. This guy's has been or is being investigated by the FBI. He's also a member of the Pasco Economic Development Council board, or ex officio member of that board, which I consider to be a conflict of interest between that role and serving on the MPO board. Anyway, I'm going to be getting more into that later. The smarmy scumbag. Cui Bono. Who benefits? Not the public, not the taxpayers, not the community, not the environment. So who? They do. These craven bureaucrats, corrupt politicians, and their sleazebag consultants. That their corruption has cost me and my family everything. But they have sovereign immunity, making them untouchable, granting them license to abuse their authority to enrich themselves at the expense of the public, taxpayers, community, and environment. So the high cost of their corruption. My name is Greg Parsons, PE. I am the inventor of the parallel flow intersection, or PFI. I hold a U.S. patent on the design. The PFI was one of 3 build alternatives in the ongoing Florida Department of Transportation District 7 study of the US 41 at SR 54 intersection located in Land O'Lakes, Florida. Land O'Lakes is an unincorporated community north of Tampa. I accuse these officials and their consultants, I name herein, of causing grievous unlawful harms to me, the taxpayers, the public, and the environment. That to benefit themselves on this project, their corruption will have cost me and my family $57 million in lost income. Cost me significant emotional distress over the past 6 years and for the rest of my days. Cost taxpayers $222 million in misallocated funds, including over $60 million in direct financial losses. Cost the public as much as $5 billion over 50 years in excess delay in fuel consumption, and cost the community environment in excess impacts. So the following is my case against the Florida Department of Transportation District 7 and Pasco County Metropolitan Planning Organization of knowingly and intentionally committing, as applicable, official and engineering misconduct under Florida Statutes 838 and 471 respectively, and violations of the U.S. False Claims Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. On the US 41 at SR 54 Preliminary Development and Environment Study and Vision 5456 Study, Phase 2. So I'm recording this on October 23rd. Here's a list of abbreviations that I'll be using throughout. You can pause the video and read through these if you wish, or refer back to this as needed. So this project, it's sponsored by FDOT District 7. It's the local public agencies are Pasco MPO, it's a Metropolitan Planning Organization in Pasco County. The project title is US 41 at SR 54 Intersection Improvement Project, and the current phase is the PD&E study. The PD&E began, I believe, sometime early 2012. I did not become interested in this project until 2014. The project opening year was originally 2020, and that's the opening year that I responded to when I proposed my PFI to the district. It was later changed to 2030. Completely unjustified and enraging to me. The project is located in Land O'Lakes. So Land O'Lakes in southern Pasco County is a bedroom community of Tampa. And the majority of the traffic at this intersection is commuter traffic. So in the morning, it's traffic that's heading south to Tampa, and then in the evening, going home. Both of these roads, US 41 and SR 54, are classified by FDOT as principal urban arterials other, meaning they are non-freeways, and that's important. The purpose and need of this project, and I'm going to quote from their preliminary engineering report. It's also in their NEPA document, which is a categorical exclusion type 2. So the purpose and need is to, quote, evaluate alternative capacity and operational improvements. So that's an incorrectly written purpose and need statement. That's the purpose of the study, but that's not the purpose of the project. It just shows that the people that are behind this project are incompetent at best. But the project purpose and need is to meet projected traffic demand, and that's very important, resulting from development in Pasco County, end quote, to meet projected traffic demand. They just completed in February the feasibility study task for the PD&E. So this was a sub-task within the study that they were calling a feasibility study, and that was completed essentially in February of this year when they made their announcement to the MPO board that they were selecting the SPUI as their preferred alternative. It began 18 April 2019, so it was a 4-year effort. The build alternatives that they presumably studied the feasibility of, which that never actually happened. But the 3 alternatives are the SPUI 4-phase variant. I say 4-phase variant because it's not a standard SPUI. Standard SPUI is 3 phases, and by phase, that's each phase of the signal cycle. So there's a signal on the crossroad where the ramps intersect, and in this case, under the bridge. And that signal is going to operate with 4 phases per cycle, not 3. So a traditional standard intersection has, in general, 4 phases per signal cycle. So you think about when you arrive at a signal, there's 4 phases. One is the through phase on the approach, then the left turn on the approach, then the crossroad through, and then the crossroad left turn. So each of those movements is a separate phase. The right turns occur in overlapping phases. So the signal is operating in 4 phases. Now, a traditional SPUI signal does not have the cross-through movement on the ramps. But in this case, on this project, what they're proposing is for the cross movement on the ramps as an added phase in order to allow for local access. So the ramps at this SPUI will be frontage roads. they'll function as frontage roads. So that adds an additional phase to the signal cycle, which makes this SPUI intersection less efficient than a standard SPUI. And then alternative 2 is the PFI, my patented intersection. They designed it, but I have the patent on the PFI. And it's the 4-leg 2-phase variant. So that means each leg of the intersection receives the PFI treatment, and I'll go into that in a bit. The signal's operating with 2 phases per cycle, so it's very efficient. So their signal at the SPUI is 4 phases per cycle, and the PFI is 2. And then the third alternative is a CFI, or continuous flow intersection. It's a 4-leg 2-phase variant with bridges, which is asinine, but that's what they included as the third alternative, and I will explain the story behind that. So to note up here on purpose and need, that the purpose and need, or PNN statement, it uses the word meet, not generate future traffic demand. Okay. I believe the unofficial true purpose of this project is about generating future traffic on State Route 54 for economic development of Newport Richey and Port Richey. So those are 2 towns that are located at the western terminus of State Route 54 on the Gulf of Mexico. You have 2 politicians, one from Newport Richey, one from Port Richey, that are sitting on that MPO board, who have an agenda of turning State Route 54 into a freeway. And then Catherine Starkey, who we just met at the beginning, she's a county commissioner of a district that borders State Route 54, and there's more to her story. But most of these board members, I believe, have conflicts of interest on this project, and that they want to convert State Route 54 into a freeway, and building the SPUI at this intersection would be the first step to achieving that. And the reason that I say that this is very likely, actually there are several reasons. They're circumstantial. I don't have a smoking gun evidence that this is the case. It is circumstantial, but their conduct and the decisions that they've made all point in this direction. So what I'm saying here is that the board accepts the SPUI alternative, even though it's going to retain congestion on US 41. So with the SPUI built, US 41 remains congested. State Route 54 works great, but the ramps will be congested and US 41 will be congested. They are not concerned about that at all. So I say it's going to operate at level service F. So the SPUI will operate in the future at a level service F, which is a failing level of service. I say this violates NEPA because the purpose and need is stating that by meeting future traffic demand in the design year, which is 2045, that's their current design year, that by 2045 they need to be at level service D with no congested movements. That's what it means to say they're going to meet future traffic demand. Okay, and that is what the FDOT level of service policy states. That's a target level service for urban roadways in the state of Florida is to meet a minimum level service of D, and that also implies no failing individual movements. Does to me, because otherwise you're not going to have a level service D. And the SPUI alternative that they've selected fails to achieve that. So basically the SPUI that they've selected fails to satisfy the purpose and need of the project. But the PFI does, because the PFI will operate at a level service D with no failing movements if it's properly designed, properly signalized. I also say here that the SPUI creates a grossly unequal user benefit, which I think also violates NEPA. Maybe not by the letter of the law, but certainly the spirit of it. That there should be an effort made to have equal user benefit. And by user benefit, that's measured in terms of delay and fuel consumption. The SPUI is unequal in that regard because the people using the bridge, they're not delayed at all, and they will consume the least amount of fuel getting through the junction because the bridge is free flow. But for everybody on 41 and the ramps that are intending to turn onto 41, they're going to be delayed, and they're going to experience excess fuel consumption by a lot. And that's the unequal user benefit. Whereas at the PFI, the delay and fuel consumption is the same on both roads. And then I also am noting here that with their alternatives that they listed, the SPUI is 1, PFI 2, CFI 3. That's not the correct order of alternatives. This is another deliberate deception, deliberate manipulation by the FDOT. These three alternatives were voted on by the MPO Vision 5456 Study Task Force. I'll explain more what that is about, but that task force voted on three alternatives they wanted FDOT to evaluate, which FDOT agreed to do. And that's what the 4-year feasibility study was intended to perform, is a feasibility study of these three alternatives that came from the task force. The task force voted the PFI as their preferred alternative. It should be number 1, and the SPUI was number 2. But the MPO, the board, the staff, agenda-driven, wanting the SPUI, and FDOT reordered it and made the SPUI number 1 and the PFI number 2. Now, I'm sure that they will say, oh, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't mean anything. Those are just numbers of the alternatives. But they know damn well that it does have an influence on how people perceive the projects and what people think is the preferred project per the agency. That it's kind of a pre-selection ordering of the projects, and the PFI should have been number 1 because that's what the task force voted as their preferred alternative. I complained about this, and my complaints were ignored. This is the theme throughout the last 7 years that I've been involved with this project. So about me. I am a licensed engineer in the state of Florida since 2007, and before that I was a licensed engineer in the state of Ohio. I used to live in Ohio and moved to Florida and allowed my Ohio license to go inactive. I invented the parallel flow intersection, or PFI, and I obtained a patent for it, which is dated from September 2004. I'm the sole expert on the PFI. I have 37 years of experience in roadway and traffic engineering, and 28 of those years employed by architectural engineering consulting firms working on state and local agency roadway and engineering projects. I've served as lead engineer and project manager of preliminary development for several mega projects. These would be projects that would be like $100 million or more in construction, with construction totaling over $5 billion in current year dollars, including capacity upgrade of urban interstate and new rural freeway alignments. I have experience with preliminary and final design of urban and rural non-freeway major and minor arterials and local roads, preliminary and final design of urban and rural interstate and state freeways and interchanges, modern roundabout engineering, preliminary design of other non-traditional traffic junctions, aside from the PFI, including the continuous flow intersection, diverging diamond interchange, superstreet, and others. I have a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering with a concentration in Transportation Engineering, and I do business in the state of Florida as GF Parsons. So before I go on, I want to give a brief overview of the PFI, since I know it's new and most everyone has likely never heard of it. People in transportation engineering in this industry, I think, should have at least heard of it or know of it. So the PFI, the way it works is to have drivers that intend to turn left. They enter into the left turn lanes, which are in the center, like you would at a normal intersection. But instead of turning through the main intersection onto the crossroad, the left turning driver turns onto what I call bypass road, which is parallel and adjacent to the crossroad. So this bypass road, it functions like a frontage road. So people turn onto this bypass road. It directs them to a crossover junction, I call the bypass junction, where they then go through and continue on. All the junctions at the PFI are signalized, and the signals are functioning as two-phase signals. So it's 2 phases per cycle. So what that means is the person turning left, which the left turn is in this blue line, the person turning left onto the bypass road does that at the same time the crossroad through traffic is going. So those become overlapping movements. And then when the approach road through traffic is going, the crossroad left turn is at the same time. And those are the 2 phases. The orange line here is the right turn path. I think it's pretty straightforward, simple operation. I think that FDOT would have you believe otherwise, but it's pretty straightforward. It is confusing looking. If you're looking at it from a helicopter, it'll look confusing, but that confusion is really unfamiliarity. That when you look at it, it's going to be like, what is that? But once you understand it, it makes sense. This graphic just highlights the left turn path onto the bypass road. All of this channelization here at the main junction prevents, for the most part, a driver making a mistake. There's really no way to screw this up. If you're making your left turn, you have to turn onto the bypass road, and then there's additional channelization at the crossover junction to guide people onto the crossroad. The benefit that this arrangement provides is to greatly reduce delay and congestion over a conventional intersection. So this graphic here just shows, say, a situation where a conventional signal would be at over 150 seconds of average vehicle delay, which is failing. That would be a level service F. The PFI can reduce that. This is with the same number of lanes basically, but with the addition of the bypass roads, the PFI can reduce that by over 80%, that delay. You know, and if your time is valuable, if you don't want to spend your day stuck in traffic or sitting through multiple signal cycles on your way home from work or to work in the morning, then the PFI is really great. And the CFI too. That's a similar design. Okay. FDOT does not care how much time you spend sitting there at the signal. They really don't. That's one thing I've learned over the last, well, many years really, is that FDOT and all the DOTs across the country, it's almost a point of pride for them to see people stuck in queue. It's almost like, oh, we got you, suckers. That's kind of their attitude. They'll never admit that. They're not stupid people. They're conniving. They're clever, like you would expect any bureaucrat, because that's one of the things that bureaucrats are competent at being, conniving and clever. Right? So they're not going to admit that in public. But when you look at their actions, if you measure their mindset by what they actually do, well, I think it becomes pretty clear. So anyway, the PFI increases capacity and reduces delay over traditional signal with fewer phases per cycle. PFI is an efficient, low-impact, low-cost alternative to grade separations or bridges or flyovers. So you have a busy intersection that is very congested. In the past, the way to fix that, well, add more lanes, but that doesn't typically help very much, or build a bridge. Okay, but building a bridge is very expensive. Not that they care, but it's very expensive. But also building the bridge doesn't really solve the problem. It turns out to be less of an effective solution than people think, because when we think of bridges, we typically think of freeways. But when you build a bridge on a arterial road where there's signals and you have heavy turning movements where people are making left turns, right turns, the bridge only tends to serve a small, a fraction of the traffic. You don't have a big dominant movement like you do on a freeway where you have tons of traffic on the freeway and not so much traffic on the side road. So the bridge really does make a big difference. But when you have an arterial intersection like this one, where you have heavy turning movements, the bridge doesn't really deliver a whole lot of benefit. Again, not that FDOT would ever admit that. So the PFI is new and none have been built to date. Of course, none have been built to date because every time I propose it, it gets rejected out of hand, summarily, without consideration, and always accompanied with a bureaucratic excuse. That's why it's never been built. There are two existing proto-PFIs. One is located at the intersection of State Route 315 and Hard Road in Columbus, Ohio. And then the other is at the intersection of US 130 and State Route 168 in Camden, New Jersey. I call them proto-PFIs because these were built before I got my patent. They have some qualities that are PFI-like, but they're not PFIs. There are important differences or deficiencies where they can't be called a PFI, and they solve different problems. It just so happens that the intersection of 315 and Hard Road, I designed that when I was in Columbus, Ohio, working for URS. URS is later bought out by AECOM. I designed that as a impact avoidance alternative because there at the corner exists a house that was determined to have cultural significance, and I was tasked with coming up with an alternative to avoid that structure. It just so happened that the alternative I came up with is at the main intersection like a PFI. And it didn't have any influence on my coming up with the PFI later. That's just pure coincidence. Then the one in Camden, New Jersey was built, I think, maybe in the 60s or 70s, been there a long time. And it was built with the geometry that is like a PFI somewhat, but it was done that way to accommodate the extreme skew angle of intersection. So these two roads intersect at a very high skew angle, and so they did this design that creates bypass roads that are similar to a PFI to accommodate that geometry. So the PFI is all about capacity and efficiency. So in this graphic here at the bottom, this is a video clip of the main intersection, main junction of US 41 and State Route 54. So this is the project in Pasco County. This is my design and my VSIM model. So VSIM is a traffic simulation software program, industry standard. Every DOT uses it. Federal Highways uses it. They all accept it. And it was used on the feasibility study of this particular project. That's what FDOT used, and I use it. So this is a clip of the VSIM simulation of my PFI design and signalization, and using FDOT's design year AM peak hour traffic. So what I'm trying to show here is just the basic operation of the PFI at the main junction. It just so happens there's a railroad track that runs parallel to US 41. So what you see here is this is 54 through traffic going while 41 left turns are going. And then it switches. You have 41 through traffic while the 54 left turns are going at the same time. And so what you see here is that there's no congestion. So this is 40 some minutes into the AM peak period, and there's no congestion. At this point in time with the SPUI signal, it's very congested. So I want to go over the differences between the PFI and CFI. They are not the same. Okay, they're not the same. I wouldn't be able to get a patent on the PFI if it was the same as the CFI. This is completely lost on the DOT. Not that they care, they don't care. But they like to say, oh, the PFI is just a CFI. How can you patent that? Well, no, they're different junctions. They're different. Okay. So here is a size comparison between the PFI and CFI. And this is the main reason that the PFI provides added utility over the CFI, is that it's more compact on the approaches. The PFI takes up half as much space as the CFI, which matters in urban environments where there's often not a lot of space, particularly between adjacent intersections. The PFI can potentially fit more locations than the CFI. So the CFI displaces the left turn lanes, which is illustrated here. So this is the stop bar for the left turn in the center, and it's been moved back from the crossroad and the main junction hundreds of feet to make room for what I call the CFI's bypass ramp. This is a bypass ramp. The PFI is a bypass road, CFI is a bypass ramp. I make that distinction because of the way the CFI is intended to operate. So what the CFI does is have people making their left turn, they cross over onto the bypass ramp, and they get a green indicator here at this signal. So they're getting green light. They proceed on through and make their left turn. So they don't stop here. They're not supposed to stop. So the way the CFI is arranged, its geometry, is based on basically how much distance is required to coordinate these signals such that the people, when they cross over at this crossover junction, by the time the leading vehicles reach this point at the main junction, they've got a green light, they keep going. They make their left turn without stopping. Okay, whereas at the PFI, the bypass road is a frontage road and traffic is stopped. So the length of the bypass road is dictated more by how much storage is needed, because people are going to come up here and stop and they're going to queue up before they can continue. One of the distinctions between them is that the bypass road for the PFI, there's no reason not to have driveways. You know, think of it as a frontage road. So putting driveways on the bypass road is fine. Putting driveways on the CFI's bypass ramp, not a good idea, because it doesn't accommodate stopping and slowing down for turning movements, whereas the PFI does. People are going to get down here and stop anyway, usually. So another distinction is that the bypass ramp of the CFI is higher speed. The average speed of vehicles on this ramp is higher because they're not having to stop. So their speed is dictated more by the geometry of the road, not by the presence of this signal. In fact, they're going to be going faster because they want to clear the signal. They don't want to get stopped here. You also have a higher speed crossover at the CFI because people are coming from the approach of the main line, so they're traveling at a higher speed. This could be a signal, a green signal here, where they cross over without having to slow down very much. And then they're still going fairly fast when they get to this signal, and then they slow down for that left turn. Whereas at the PFI, you've got a low speed turn at the main junction onto the bypass road, and then they're going to encounter the signals, so they're slow. So the speed on the bypass road is like 25 miles per hour. It's a low speed. This is a low speed route through the PFI. Whereas at the CFI, this can be a fairly high speed until they get down to the main junction to make their left turn. So that's kind of the differences between the two. You see that the PFI affects different quadrants of the intersection. It's going to affect the in this instance here, the southwest corner of the intersection, whereas the CFI is going to be impacting like the opposite quadrants. This is going to be the northwest quadrant here, where the bypass ramp is. So it impacts the site differently. The PFI requires less space on the approaches, so it's more compact. The difference between choosing the PFI and CFI is not a matter of capacity or its level of service. They're going to be roughly equivalent. It really comes down to site and site impacts. Which one is going to fit the site better? That's a distinction, again, lost on the DOT, and I believe intentionally, willfully so. They don't want to have to think about it. Everything for them has to be a cookie cutter solution, because if it's not, that might mean they have to work. Bureaucrats don't like to work. They hate that. They hate working. Okay, so the CFI is a high capacity signalized intersection, as is the PFI. FHWA calls a CFI a DLT, or displaced left turn, because it displaces the left turn. The PFI does not displace the left turn. It's more like an offset left, not a displaced left. FHWA has refused to acknowledge the PFI until one gets built. And the state DOTs and local agencies have been very reluctant to consider a PFI because Federal Highways doesn't acknowledge it. So I have had to contend with this bureaucratic catch-22 for years. Both intersection types have similar capacity, but the layout and operation are different. So again, the decision to build the PFI versus CFI depends on site impacts, not capacity. The PFI is more compact than the CFI and affects different intersection quadrants. The PFI requires widening of the crossroad, while the CFI requires widening of the approach road. PFI has 3 signals that traffic goes through, and the CFI has 2. So that means the PFI does involve more stops than the CFI. But those stops are incidental. They're incidental relative to a congested traditional intersection with stop and go traffic, where you may have to stop a dozen or more times to get through the signal. Whereas at the PFI, you'll have to stop maybe a little less than 2 times on average. Some drivers 2, other drivers maybe only once, depends on when they hit the signals. And the CFI is going to be less than that on average. The CFI might be 1.25 stops to a PFI's 1.75 stops. That's the kind of difference we're talking about. CFI is typically signalized not to stop traffic on the ramp, and the PFI stores traffic on the bypass road. So that's why I say it's functioning as a frontage road. District 7 repeatedly referred to the PFI incorrectly as displaced turn intersection. Yeah, they just call it, it's just a CFI by another name. That's their attitude. Because they've spent all of 5 seconds actually thinking about the PFI. So it's just a CFI. It's basically all I did is repatent the CFI. And the CFI was patented at one time, which inspired me to patent the PFI. When I first encountered the CFI, it's like, oh, you can patent something like that? Huh, maybe I can. So that's what I did. But yeah, the CFI was patented, and no CFI had been built until the patent expired. So 20 years. 20 years of saying no to the CFI until one day the patent expires and it's like, hey, this is a cool idea. Let's build the CFI. That's the agency attitude. And that's the attitude I've gotten on the PFI. Oh, it's patented? Well, we don't want to bother with that. Doesn't matter how good it is. Doesn't matter how much it benefits the public. Doesn't matter how much it saves. Oh, it's patented. Even though they don't know anything about patents, and they don't realize, most of these bureaucrats that I deal with at the DOT don't seem to understand that the DOT already uses patented products for all their projects that they pay royalties on. Anyway. So, yeah. So, again, this is more of this bureaucratic BS to lie to the public to get their way, to a naive public, say a public that is both naive and unknowledgeable about the subject. They get away with lying all the time. So in this case, they're calling the PFI was just one of those displaced turn intersections when it actually is not, and that's deliberate misconduct on their part. Just another example. District 7 incorrectly applied the Federal Highway DLT informational guide to design and signalize the PFI incorrectly. I objected and they ignored me. More misconduct on their part. So they're using a design guide for the CFI to design the PFI instead of using me to design the PFI. I invented it. I'm an expert on the PFI. I'm ignored, and instead they use a design guide for a different type of intersection.